The Gatling gunner cranks his weapon in a panic, spraying an arc of projectiles as he turns back towards the wounded Great Axe brute. With the death of Srok Skyreaver, the Ratmen Expedition returned to camp in low spirits. What now? With their patron fallen, they must plan their next steps. As the debate wears on, a roaring cry is heard in the distance, followed by cackling calls on the other side of camp. Scrambling, a defence is quickly organised. A box of caltrops is unpacked, and a device considered by Srok to be too unsporting for the hunt is primed. Let them come. Using the last stand scenario from the Proving Grounds mission pack, the Ratmen deploy in their camp. The Beastmen will be arriving in waves around the edges of the board. The Ratmen must hold, keeping at least one model alive when the game ends. The Beastmen must kill them all. The Ratmen have time to fortify their camp before the Beastmen arrive, preparing the ground with traps, though rolling a 1 apparently not that much time. They manage to trap one area of grassland on the left, seeding it with caltrops, turning that area into dangerous terrain. Turn 1 begins and the first Beastman wave arrives. The Huntmaster Zizu Manyshot deploys at the front of the camp, and 2 units of warriors deploy on the right flank. Taking the first turn, a unit of Beastman warriors rushes forward to the front of the Ratmen camp, bellowing threats and striking their shields. Dr. Ratnik shifts into a position to shoot and fires his toxin gun at the approaching Beastman warriors. He's run out of exploding poison shells with the switch to 3rd edition, and only has boring old regular poison bullets left. One of his shots is on target, and a Beastman warrior stumbles and falls as it moves around the long grass. The second unit of Beastman warriors rushes towards the camp, jeering at the Ratmen warriors and Death Roller, ready to begin the slaughter. The Gatling gun creeps through the tents, springing up on the flank of the jeering Beastmen. Cackling maniacally, the gunner cranks the handle on his weapon and fires a wild hail of bullets towards the warriors. A trail of shots kick up plumes of dust from the ground and grasses around their targets, but only one shot hits, a glancing strike that ricochets off the Beastman's armour. Zizu stalks forward and releases a volley from his triple shortbow towards the blue Ratmen warriors. Arrows zip through the air around the Ratmen, one striking a warrior in the collarbone, knocking him from his feet and removing him from the fight. The remaining blue Ratmen warriors charge forward, shields raised against the rain of arrows. They crash into the closest Beastman warriors. Their short swords strike out. One slips beneath the Beastman's shield to bite deep in the warrior's guts, while the other 2 combatants trade blows on each other's shields. With a mighty sweep, the last Beastman warrior drives the Ratman back. The Death Roller pilot rips open the throttle, thick black smoke billowing from the ramshackle engine, and he spins his machine and careens towards the closest unit of warriors. Startled by the engine's roar, the Beastmen react slowly, and 2 are caught under the crushing wheels as the contraption ploughs into them. The pilot kicks out wildly as the machine churns, to no real effect, and the final warrior smashes the machine with his cleaver, but the wood and iron wheels resist the blow, and the Death Roller retreats for another pass. As the Death Roller makes way, the Storm veterans charge across the camp into that final Beastman warrior. Overwhelming him from all directions, the veterans cut him down in a brutally efficient display, their great swords easily finding the gaps in his defence. With all the action on the right flank, the green Ratman warriors move across to the centre of camp, ready to respond to any future threats. Turn 1 ends with 5 Beastman warriors being cut down at the cost of 1 Ratman. A good start for the Rats. They're going to need to keep that up. A new wave of Beastmen arrive at the start of turn 2. A unit of hunters with dual hand weapons arrive on the left flank, while a dual axe brute arrives on the right. The brute thunders into camp, bellowing loudly as it charges the Death Roller. Lashing out with axes in both hands, it furiously smashes the machine over and again. While the construction was proof against the smaller Beastman's cleaver, it suffers under the heavy axes of the brute. Timber splinters and iron buckles as the machine splutters and comes to a halt, the pilot desperately trying to keep from being caught under an axe. Girding himself, the pilot nurses the spluttering engine, heart pounding in his chest, and manages to keep the machine alive, if barely. The last Beastman warrior leaps at one of the Ratmen before him, lashing out with cleaver and shield. The first strike is turned aside, but unprepared for the ferocity of the attack, the Ratman's skull is split open under the unrelenting assault. The second Ratman strikes to avenge his comrade, but it's too slow and the Beastman backs warily out of reach. With a freshly filled ammo pack, the Gatling gun winds up and unleashes on the brute at point blank range. Shot rips through the air, ricocheting off the brute's heavy armour as it raises its arm to cover its face, the small calibre doing little more than annoy the beast. The Huntmaster Zizu continues his stalk forward, loosing at the Storm veterans with his triple shortbow. Arrows fall around the veterans as they contemptuously cut them from the air with their greatswords. Dr. Ratnik reloads and turns around, firing over the long grass at the approaching Beastman hunters. His aim is good, but the hunters duck as they realise they've been spotted and avoid the poisoned shot. Keeping low, they rush through the long grass towards the doctor, unaware of the traps awaiting them. Nevertheless, they pass through swiftly with the strider rule and avoid the dangerous caltrops hidden in the terrain. With chuckling cries, they warn the other beastmen to watch their step. As the final Beastman warrior backs away, the last blue warrior presses him, thrusting with his sword. Both warriors are fatiguing, and though they trade blows, neither is able to land an effective strike. The Ratman backs away, and both warriors take a moment to catch their breath. The Storm veterans turn around and charge the distracted brute, cutting out with their greatswords. Growling at the Gatling gun, the brute is taken unawares as the veteran strikes land, cutting deep between the armoured plates. The Ratman force the brute to his knees, and stunned by the assault, it's unable to retaliate. Alerted by the hunters' cries, the green warriors charge past Dr. Ratnik at the approaching beastmen. They stab out with their short swords and fell one of the hunters, the others nimbly ducking aside before striking back. Harried by shields and avoiding the Ratman's seeking blades, the hunters' sweeping claws fail to bite, though they do manage to force the Ratman back. At the end of turn 2, there's a bit of damage going on either side's heavier units, but the Ratmen are going to have to put some beastmen down or be very quickly overwhelmed. At the start of turn 3, another wave of beastmen arrive, a brute wielding a great axe on the right flank, along with a unit of bow-armed raiders. The stunned brute rises groggily to its feet, blood pouring from its wounds, and growls threateningly at the Storm veterans. The green Ratman warriors charge back into the fray, stabbing out at the hunters. One strike slips past a hunter's guard, but slides off his hardened leathers, and the Ratmen are forced to retreat from the whirlwind of blades to avoid being struck. The reinforcing brute charges into the Storm veterans, lashing out wildly with his great axe. The first sweep is wide, the second striking the Storm veteran sergeant, bracing beneath a sword guard. The sergeant is knocked back 2 steps, but his guard redirects the axe blow, and arms shaking from the strike, he remains unharmed. The other 2 Storm veterans strike back on the brute's flanks. One sword blow clatters off the brute's heavy armour, but the second bites into its exposed thigh. The brute bellows in pain and stumbles away from the veterans. The Death Roller pilot revs his failing engine and releases the clutch, causing the machine to lurch forward unpredictably. It rams into the heavily wounded brute who, hampered by his wounds, is slow to react. The brute is knocked from its feet and ground messily into the earth. The dual weapon hunters circle the green Ratman and leap upon Dr. Ratnik. Fatigued from the earlier fight, their swings are wide of their mark, and Dr. Ratnik avoids being struck. Reversing his toxin gun, he wields it as a club, and knocking a hunter from his feet, finishes the beastman with a sickening crunch. The last hunter scrambles back, breathing heavily. The last blue Ratman approaches the final beastman warrior once more, shield held high. Both warriors trade blows, but they are evenly matched, and the Ratman falls back to further study his opponent. Zizu continues creeping forward into the long grass, popping up to release 3 arrows at Dr. Ratnik. In an inspiring display, all 3 are on target, One is intercepted by the toxin gun stock, protruding from the butt like a black flag, but the other two strike flesh, creasing Ratnik's thigh and sinking into his left bicep. Crying out in pain, Dr. Ratnik springs away, snapping the arrow from the stock and swiftly reloading. He spins on the spot and fires towards the Huntmaster, 360 no-scope. His aim is true, but Zizu disappears back into the grass, avoiding the shot at the last moment. The bow-armed raiders climb to the top of the hill, raining arrows down on the death roller. Most arrows are wide, but one strikes the pilot, throwing him from his seat. Unattended, the roller careens away, slamming into the cliff face before igniting as fuel sprays from the ruptured machine. Eyes drawn by the flaming wreckage, the Gatling gun team turns on the spot and hoses down the top of the hill, the gunner cranking as fast as he can, and the loader pouring cartridges into the hungry device. The hail of shot rips across the crest of the hill, cutting down all of the exposed raiders, whose lifeless forms tumble back down the slope. The duel between the Blue Ratman and Beastman warrior continues back and forth, the Beastman pressing his smaller opponent. They exchange blows, neither able to land a strike, before separating once more. The Storm veterans harry the wounded brute, cutting out with their swords, but the wide sweeps of the brute's great axe keep them out of range, and they back away to recover their breath. It's the end of turn 3, and the Beastmen have suffered a bit, losing 5 models, including one of the brutes. The Ratmen have lost their big death roller, and Dr. Ratnik is looking rather haggard. They remain ahead, but attrition favours the Beastmen. Turn 4 begins with spear hunters deploying in the trees on the left, and another brute with dual axes deploying on the right. The fresh dual axe brute charges the Storm veterans as they move to press his fellow. Lashing out in a storm of axes, his furious blows shear steel and crumple armour, and he leaves a trail of broken corpses in his wake. Wiping out the veterans in mere moments, his momentum carries him closer to camp. Ouch! The Gatling gunner cranks his weapon in a panic, spraying an arc of projectiles as he turns back towards the wounded Great Axe brute. Again though, the scattering of shot is deflected by the brute's heavy armour and raised forearm. Stung by splatters of hot lead, the Great Weapon brute charges away from the Gatling gun, into the middle of the camp. It spots Dr. Ratnik and sweeps its axe towards him. He ducks aside from the first strike, the axe driving deep into the earth to become lodged. Bellowing in frustration, the brute unleashes a mighty kick towards Dr. Ratnik, catching the engineer in the chest, snapping ribs and throwing him into the air. As Ratnik crashes to the ground with a cry of pain, the brute rips his axe from the ground, roaring his superiority. As the brute postures with axe held high, Dr. Ratnik rises painfully to his feet. Supporting himself with his toxin gun, he begins to ram powder and shot down the barrel. The spear hunters charge through the trees, falling on the green Ratman warriors. As they leap forward and lance out with their spears, the Ratmen duck away before striking back with their short swords. Knocking a spear shaft aside with his shield, one of the warriors catches a hunter in the chest, and the Beastman falls to the ground, a sucking wound bubbling blood into the earth. The others scramble back out of reach. As the spear hunters withdraw, the green warriors turn and charge the last dual weapon hunter, coming at him from all sides. They swiftly put him down. The last Beastman warrior charges back at the blue Ratman, determined to finish him. But the Ratman has learned his opponent well. Ducking away from his strikes, the Ratman drives his shield up into an opening. The sturdy heater smashes into the Beastman's snout, and the bestial warrior falls on his arse, stunned by the blow. With his adversary now seeing stars, the Ratman warrior seizes his chance and swiftly finishes his worthy opponent. Popping back up from the long grass, Zizu shoots 3 arrows at Dr. Ratnik, but fearful of accidentally hitting the brute, all 3 shots are wide. Turn 4 ends and the Beastmen roll a d3 to determine how many units they can deploy next turn. A roll of a 4 gives them 2 fallen units back. Dr. Ratnik is in trouble. With only 4 units remaining, they have to hold out for at least 1 more turn to proclaim victory. They're picking off Beastmen units, but will it be enough? At the start of turn 5, the Beastmen choose 2 destroyed units to redeploy, and a brute with dual axes and a unit of raiders with bows arrive on the right flank. Dr. Ratnik finishes ramming a second ball home, and cocking, fires at the brute at point blank range. As the cloud of smoke disperses, the brute stumbles back, a crater deforming its breastplate and a bloody hole punched through its abdomen. It roars in pain and fury. Pity Ratnik's run out of his explosive shells. The dual axe brute in the camp turns and charges the Gatling gun team. He's a storm of axes once more, obliterating the Ratmen and their weaponry and mangling the corpses as they lay on the ground. Consumed by bloodlust and coated in gore, the brute moves towards the centre of camp. In a heroic display, the Green Ratmen charge the Great Weapon Brute to protect Dr. Ratnik, heedless of their own lives. They swarm over the beast, short swords pumping in and out, and the brute sinks to the ground, lifeblood flowing freely. The Ratmen warriors reposition, baring their teeth and daring the Beastmen to harm the Doctor again. Thundering in from the flank, the latest dual axe brute charges the victorious Blue Warrior. His axes hammer out mercilessly, pummeling the Ratman and bowling him from his feet. Somehow still alive despite the beating, the courageous warrior rises back up, preparing to go again. The Huntmaster looses the arrows on his triple shortbow at the Green Ratman guarding Dr. Ratnik. As the volley lands around them, one of the warriors falls, an arrow in his throat. Following up on the volley, the spear-armed hunters charge the Green Warriors. A second warrior goes down under their spear thrusts, but the last Green Ratman managed to slip behind the spear tips and cut a hunter down in return, forcing the last Beastman back. The raiders carefully stalk to the top of the hill, wary of the bullet-ridden corpses at its base. 2 spot the last Green Warrior and release their arrows, but in the chaos of the fight, they go horribly wide. At the end of turn 5, we roll to see if the game ends. 1 to 3, the Ratmen will be victorious. 4 to 6, the game continues. On a 4, the game continues and the Ratmen must continue to hold. A D3 roll of a 3 gives the Beastmen 2 additional models at the start of turn 6. With only 3 models remaining, things are not looking good for the Ratmen. Turn 6 begins with the Beastmen deploying dual weapon hunters on the left and another Great Axe Brute on the right. Brutally battered and getting desperate, Dr. Ratnik scrambles back to the crates for cover. With shallow, painful breaths, he swiftly reloads and fires his toxin gun at the closest hunter, stunning the creature, but not killing it. The gore-coated brute charges the last Green Warrior, dual axes lashing out. The Ratman's shield comes up in defence, but the furious assault drives the Ratman back, his shield sundered under the relentless blows, and he falls to the ground, alive but bleeding fiercely. Eyes rising to behold the massive, hulking form before him, the last Blue Ratman is hit with a sudden bolt of good sense. He immediately turns and sprints away from his towering opponent, throwing his shield over his back to cover his retreat. The raiders continue stalking along the hill, loosing towards the stunned Green Ratman. Laying squirming on the ground, he's an easy target for the raiders, and 2 arrows find their mark, slaying the brave warrior. Momentarily stupefied by the Ratman's sudden flight, the second dual axe brute rushes after him, but the momentary pause is enough to keep the Blue Warrior just out of reach. Tracking the Blue Warrior's flight, Zizu shoots 3 arrows towards him. 2 are wide, and the final arrow is caught by the shield slung over the Ratman's shoulder. The stunned spear hunter clambers back to his feet, groggily shaking his muzzle. The dual weapon hunters rush into the centre of camp through the forest, and the Great Axe Brute converges on the other side of camp, neither able to reach the last 2 Ratmen. Turn 6 is over, and with a roll of a 1, the game comes to an end. the Ratmen barely standing, but victorious nonetheless. Turns out, bravely running away was the key to victory all along. A horn sounds out. The Beastmen assault halts. The last of the Ratmen warriors rushes wearily to Dr. Ratnik's side, and the Beastmen slowly surround the 2 remaining expedition members. Preparing for the end, the warrior grasps his shield, and Dr. Ratnik clubs his toxin gun. The circle of Beastmen parts, and Zizu Manyshot steps forward, contemptuously throwing the camp's banner to the earth before him. He shouts in his harsh and cackling language, gesturing threateningly, and thrusting his hand towards the horizon behind the Ratmen. As Dr. Ratnik follows his gestures, the circle behind him parts, and the way is open. The 2 battered Ratmen hobble away, and the Beastmen begin looting the camp, their message clear. You fought well, but carry this warning to others. These plains belong to the Beast Pride, and they do not suffer trespass.